Great.
Okay, it's 7:05, so I think that I will begin. Is it good? Okay, all right. So I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the Social Action Committee of Temple Sinai. The SAC, as we lovingly called it, is chaired by Susan Stanger, Leslie Newman, and Donna Goldberg. And Ari Elliott is the Vice President of the Caring Community and Social Action. Our little working group, consisting of Joyce Herman, Sandy Mitzner, Joan Rubin, and myself, put this series, Democracy Under Threat, The Way Forward, together. So I'm the housekeeping person, so here I go. Please be sure that you're all muted right after I am talking, especially once our speaker begins her talk, and keep it yourselves muted until the end. Please save your questions to the very end during the Q&A, and please, if you can, put them in the chat box and address them to Joyce Herman, the person with the red shirt there in that square, who will be leading the Q&A. So this is the schedule of what happens tonight. There's my housekeeping introduction. Joyce Herman will be introducing our speaker, Cherie Brown. Our speaker will give her presentation, followed by breakout rooms. So we'll all be going into breakout rooms for processing of what Cherie has said, and then we'll come together for the Q&A. If you missed our first presentation in this series given by David K. Johnston, entitled The Way Forward, What's Needed for Our Democracy to Endure, you can find the recording on the Temple Sinai website. Our series of talks continues on June 1st at 7 p.m. with Robert C. Lieberman, the Krieger Eisenhower Professor and former provost at Johns Hopkins University. Lieberman is co-author of a book entitled Four Threats: The Recurring Crisis of American Democracy, and he is an authority on race and public policy in the United States. And if you are interested in joining a group to read the Four Threats in advance of the talk, please send a direct message in the chat to Joan Rubin. And with that, I will now leave you in the very capable hands of Joyce Herman.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. What a pleasure it is to be working with this group and on a topic that's so important. Those of you who know me well know how exciting it is for me to be introducing Cherie Brown to our congregation and to our friends in the community. Cherie and I go back a long way, right, Cherie? A really long way. A long way. She's been a mentor, a colleague, counselor, and friend for nearly 40 years. I was honored to be part of a very small group of about 7 people who met in Cherie's apartment outside of Boston. Remember Cherie? In 1984. She'd been doing exciting work on her own, bringing groups together across their divides in several significant and important places. She worked with Blacks and Jews in Watts. She worked between Protestant and Catholic women in Northern Ireland and between Jews and Arabs in Israel, Palestine. We were gathered to look at where else this work could be useful. Cherie was interested in developing leaders who would do this work that she could support and who would support her in moving this forward. We imagined bringing it to schools and universities, government, corporations, media, even police. That was the beginning of the National Coalition Building Institute, known as NCBI. And NCBI has touched all of those venues we envisioned, ultimately becoming one of the leading diversity training and grassroots leadership organizations worldwide. And there's still a little bit of work to do in these arenas, you might say.
Just a little.
A few years after that meeting, I started the Rochester chapter. Steve DeRose took over leadership in 2000. Hi, Steve. And Sandra Katz is leading it now. Hi, Sandra. Lovely to have you here. Cherie's innovative work has permeated the diversity field. She understood early that this work is delicate and deep and can't be done by just giving people information. We're talking pain and painful experiences. That means healing. both of targeted people and perpetrators. She also saw that liberation of our own people is intimately involved with the liberation of all peoples. She knew that that was more than a slogan and involved hard, deep, ongoing healing work. Along the way, Cherie added to her instinctive and heart-centered understandings an MED in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard University. She's written several books. She appears on national TV and radio, and she's adjunct faculty at the Reconstructionist Rabbinic College. One last tidbit. While doing interfaith coalition building early on, she was working with a priest who was involved with the Vatican's Catholic-Jewish Relations Department. Well, eventually their Catholic-Jewish relations work evolved, and Cherie and George married. It was a kind of iconic interfaith marriage. Eventually, obviously he had left the priesthood, but recently, while doing ancestry work, George learned that he had Jewish ancestry. And I just found that out from Cherie recently. It's what an interesting way that coalition building works. So I can't say how very pleased and thrilled I am to have Cherie here and to introduce her to you for what I know is going to be a very, very, very significant time. Thank you, Cherie, for coming.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Joyce has been a sister in love for, as she said, so many decades. And it's also great to be amongst 3 generations of NCBI leaders, from Joyce to Steve to Sandra. And I definitely consider Rochester one of my many homes. I cannot even count the number of times I've been in Joyce's house and Steve's home and in this community. So it's good to be back in the Rochester community. So we are living in increasingly divisive times with rigid position taking on all sides. Individuals and groups are continually being set up against each other. People are being asked to choose sides on so many issues. Are you pro-choice? Or are you pro-life? Are you for COVID vaccinations? Or are you an anti-vaxxer? Are you for teaching the history about racism in schools? Or are you worried that your children will unfairly be labeled racist? Are you in favor of calling Israel an apartheid state? Or do you think that label is anti-Semitic? With so many of these issues, the rising rhetoric and attacking each other's integrity when holding a differing position is leaving little room for conversation, heartfelt dialogue, and open spaces for disagreement, learning, and growth. A vibrant democracy requires having these open spaces and conversations between our peoples. I would first like to examine 2 intergroup struggles and then offer a coalition building approach to reaching greater unity between all of our groups. The first issue I want to address is the divisiveness that has sometimes existed between Black people and Jews. A major function of anti-Semitism is to divide Jews from our natural allies, other oppressed peoples. Understanding the intersection of anti-Semitism and racism can strengthen these relationships. Ideally, white Jews and Black Gentiles would be natural allies. There have been many historic moments of cooperation between Jews and peoples targeted by racism, particularly people of African heritage. Over time, Black Gentiles and white Jews, particularly in the US, have come to recognize that we have experienced oppressions that link our peoples in a common struggle for social justice. But there have also been too many moments of mistrust and division between Jewish people and Black African heritage people on both personal and political levels. Understanding what I call the hook, the intersection of anti-Semitism and racism, is key for decreasing this divide. Jews, white Ashkenazi Jews in particular, are sometimes scared and panicked as a result of a long history of betrayal and genocide. This panic has sometimes left us as Jews wanting to take charge of situations, exert strong leadership, and even interrupt or take over if it feels to us as though something could go wrong. This is not our fault. I've sometimes called these behaviors being scared active. It is connected to 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, when things going wrong could mean imminent death. In turn, Black people have learned over a long history of oppression and enslavement that when white people get scared, Black people's lives can be in danger. In the US, for example, many states have what are called stand your ground laws. Under the application of these laws, when a white person is afraid of a Black person, their fear may be considered a justifiable defense for shooting and killing the Black person. As a result, Black people understandably may not want to be too close to a person showing panic and fear. This is the hook. A history of anti-Semitism has led Jews to seek out security, and in so doing, sometimes act out scared, active behavior. A history of racism has led Black people to protect themselves, and in so doing, abandon Jews when we show how panicked we are. Understanding the histories of oppressions of both peoples can strengthen the relationships. Jews can work on healing from historic trauma and work not to act out of panic and urgency. Black people can work on healing from historic trauma and not disengage from Jews when our panicked behaviors show. The second coalition building issue I want to speak to is strengthening intergenerational alliance building. There have been many issues in these divisive times that have pitted young adults and elders. Young adults fighting for equality for transgendered peoples have been seen by some older feminists as wanting to dismantle all the hard-won victories for females fighting against sexism. Some Black Lives Matter young adult activists have been seen by veteran civil rights activists as abandoning the commitment of the civil rights movement to a nonviolent resistance movement struggle. And on Israel-Palestine issues, many Jews who were born during or right after the Holocaust have seen Israel, however oppressive its policies may be, to offer world Jewry a needed refuge against anti-Semitism. For many young adult Jews who were born after 1967, after the occupation and only know Israel as an occupying force may less and less be willing to see Israel as a refuge for Jews, but are urgently wanting elders to fight harder against the oppression of Palestinians. There can be a tendency amongst elders to discount important, fresh thinking and organization building of young adults. This disrespect for the brilliance of young minds is called adultism. And there can be a tendency amongst young adults to sideline elders, thinking we have had our chance and now it's time to get out of the way. This disrespect for the wisdom and life experience of elders is called ageism. Combating adultism, the discrimination of young people, and combating ageism, the discrimination of elders, is key now for reducing divisions amongst groups. Intergenerational collaboration in movement building will require each of us to build many authentic peer relationships across age divides. Not mentorship. Mentorship is wonderful, but authentic peer relationships across age divides. I will now offer 7 coalition building principles and practices that can be used to decrease defensiveness and divisiveness and increase unity across all of our groups. The first practice, learning to listen where it is totally unbearable to listen. Listening is a revolutionary coalition building tool. A number of years ago, I was speaking with an Arab colleague at a conference on Arab-Jewish cooperation. The ballroom was packed. In the course of my presentation, I said I was proud of Israel. I never got to finish my talk. A Lebanese woman from the back of the ballroom stood up and started shouting at me. How dare you say you are proud of Israel? For the next 15 minutes, she screamed at me about all the atrocities Israel was committing against the Palestinian people. I agreed with some of the things she said. I disagreed with others. And letting her shout at me for 15 minutes with hundreds of people listening was not easy. But I did not interrupt her. I did not try to refute her comments. I just listened. At the end of her 15 minutes of outburst, she looked up at me from the back of the room and said, "You're the first Jewish person who's ever listened to me. Can we meet for lunch?" The room was electric in that moment. Najwa and I met for several months. She had come to the US because her ears had been impaired as a result of Israel's bombings in southern Lebanon. Najwa and I met, we got close, we got to talk about each other's concerns, and as a result, we led some of the very first sessions between members of the Israeli Knesset and the PLO. Listening where it is unbearable to listen is now going to be necessary if we are going to strengthen democratic institutions. The second practice, decide to stay in coalition and not go silent, but not leave the coalition even when hurtful, oppressive things get voiced. An invited speaker on a panel recently about Israel refused to be on the panel when he learned that there would be speakers on the panel from organizations he disagreed with. Conversely, a Palestinian group on an East Coast campus recently refused to hold any dialogues with Jewish student leaders who had reached out to the Palestinian group wanting to set up a dialogue. They said any dialogue at all with Jews who support Israel in any way, however progressive they are, is paramount to colluding with the oppression of Palestinian people and should be forbidden. Agreeing to stay in coalition and dialogue together, no matter how hard things get between our peoples, is the only way forward. If we won't even stay in the room when there are strong disagreements, we will not be able to strengthen democratic institutions. The third practice: when there are intergroup conflicts, learn to listen to the heartfelt concerns underneath each side of the divisive issue. A number of years ago, a controversial speaker was invited to a campus. During his talk, he was alleged to have said, "The only good Zionist is a dead Zionist." A Jewish student stood up and said he was proud to be a Zionist. The Jewish student was slugged by another student. My organization, NCBI, was invited to campus to help reduce tensions. When I arrived on campus, ABC, CBS, and NBC camera crews were setting up. During the workshop, the Jewish student who had been slugged that day was invited to talk and share what it had been like for him that day. The student said, "My father left Germany and escaped in the 30s. He was always trying to tell me how terrified he was to be a Jew in Germany in the early 30s. The student went on to say, "I didn't understand the fear my father was trying to tell me. I grew up in the US until that day when I heard that speaker, and I was terrified." The Jewish student then burst into tears. A Black student shortly after reached out to him saying, "I felt when you were speaking that I could remove your face and put a Black face there, and that person would be saying such similar things." We continue to hear stories about racism and anti-Semitism from the students. Then it was time to try to listen to the heartfelt concerns underneath the issue. We framed the issue: should controversial speakers with passable hate messages that can potentially divide our groups, should they be welcomed on campus? And I should say this is an issue that is ripping apart campuses all over the US. Free speech versus hate speech, as it's sometimes called. The group was divided. Some thought yes, others thought no. The person saying yes was a Black African heritage man. And he said, "Do you think we are stupid? Do you think we can't listen to a speaker and separate out the hateful message from the useful things that speaker is saying? Don't insult us. That is racism." The person saying no was a Jewish student who spoke next. And he said, "Don't tell us just to trust you. Our whole history has been one of trusting those around us and then being betrayed. We need more concrete assurances before we can trust you." The group then came up with a reframed question, having heard both concerns. The reframed question was meant to take both concerns into account. Their reframed question was, how can we support the Black students on campus to have self-determination in who they get to listen to, while at the same time acknowledging and working on the trust Jews will require to move forward? As a result of addressing that reframed question, a Black Jewish coalition was built following that session that lasted many years on that campus. The fourth practice: condemning and shaming people when they make mistakes will not create an opening for change. The current environment of cancel culture is totally counterproductive for democracy flourishing and helping people change oppressive behaviors. If people keep getting canceled whenever they say hurtful, oppressive things, pretty soon, none of us will be left. As an example, ugly racist flyers were circulating on an East Coast campus. The dean canceled classes and held a campus-wide forum led by NCBI. At one point in our program, I brought up in front of the group a white male who admitted that he was ashamed to be white and male. To help him deal with those feelings of shame, we encouraged him to leap in the air and say, "It's great to be a white male," with the rest of the group applauding him. The next day, the dean of that campus called me and said, "I'm pretty sure I know the student responsible for those ugly racist flyers, but we could never catch him, and therefore we couldn't prosecute." That student came to her office and said, "If white men can get appreciated in doing this work, I want to be part of the team to lead diversity work on campus." We can and hopefully will end racism, and there will still be people with different skin colors. Making a space in our coalition for all groups, even those whose peoples have perpetrated oppression, is key for maintaining flourishing democracies. The fifth practice: building one-on-one, close, authentic relationships across group lines is ultimately the most effective way to defeat divisive, divide and conquer politics. Many years ago, I was leading a program in Birmingham, Alabama, in the 16th Street Baptist Church, where in 1963, several Black children were killed in a racially motivated bombing. At one point in my program, which had every religious leader from Birmingham in the room, a white woman who taught at the University of Birmingham put up her hand and said to me pointedly, "Cherie, help me. I feel like the Black students in my class let me into the living room, but not into the kitchen." I never forgot that question. After all, living rooms are places of polite conversation with neighbors. Living rooms are formal places where we are on our best behavior. In contrast, kitchens are where we come uninvited because we already know we belong. Kitchens are places where we can fight openly with each other. We can disagree and still come back, never doubting that we are welcome, that we have a home place. Coalition building work is ultimately increasing the diversity of people that live with us in our kitchens and visit us in our kitchens. The sixth practice: attacking people's positions, and often with tones of righteous indignation, is rarely a formula for effective coalition building. A couple were guests at a bed and breakfast and noticed a large statue in the lobby of an Indian mascot that was associated with the local university. They were totally offended by the statue and thought it was demeaning to Native Indigenous peoples. The couple went to the manager and demanded he remove it. The manager became defensive and refused to remove the statue. A month later, an NCBI leader was staying at the same bed and breakfast and also found the statue offensive. She also went to the manager, but she approached it differently. She first appreciated the hotel management and staff. She expressed her concerns about the statue, but she assumed the best of the manager. Within hours, the manager removed the statue, telling her about the couple that had come the week before and how angry he had been with that couple. When we come at people with our own painful emotions, it is often very hard for them to hear the legitimacy of our concerns. And the seventh and last practice. In every situation, when we can remember to treat people as human beings and reach for the higher ground with them, no matter how difficult they are being, we will be able to transform adversarial relationships into coalition building ones. I was returning home to DC a few years back before COVID after leading a program in the Midwest. While I was waiting to change flights, I saw a mother with two young children, and the mother smacked the girl across the face. The daughter began to shriek. I went up to the mother and said, "Looks like you're having a hard day." The mother said, "I'm having a horrible day. My husband couldn't travel with me. The kids are fighting and they're driving me crazy." I listened to the mother a bit more, and then I went over to the girl. "Having a tough time, hon." The girl sobbed harder. "My mother blames me for everything. It was my brother's fault." I listened without offering advice or comment. It took only about 5 minutes. Their flight was then announced. I whispered to the girl as she left for her flight, "You take good care of your little brother." She beamed as she joined her mother and brother to board their flight. We can't always control what comes at us, but we can control our response. Treating each person humanly and respectfully, even when they have done or said hurtful, oppressive things, can turn around the most challenging situations. Yes, these are very divisive times, but following these 7 practices will help us to sustain democratic institutions. 1, listen where it's totally unbearable to listen. 2, stay in a coalition. Don't go silent, but don't leave the coalition even when oppressive things get said. 3, listen to the heartfelt concerns underneath a divisive issue and then reframe the issue in a way that will take both sides' concerns into account. 4, refuse to condemn or shame people into changing when they have oppressive patterns, but listen to the hurt underneath the oppressive behavior. 5, build one-on-one close relationships across group lines. One-on-one relationship building is the most effective tool to defeat divisive, divide and conquer politics. 6, attacking people's positions often only creates increased defensiveness and rarely results in sustained change. Find a way to address changes needed in an upbeat, thoughtful tone. And 7, in every situation, no matter how difficult someone is being, decide to reach for the higher ground and treat them with humanity and care. Utilizing these coalition building practices can reduce divisiveness between our groups and strengthen democratic principles. So we will now have an opportunity to go, as Joyce mentioned earlier, into a short pair. The total amount of time we will offer will be 10 minutes. And try to give each person time to speak. You can talk about things that I said that inspired you. You could talk about something I said that reminded you of an experience in your own life. You can also think about a question that you might want to ask me. And when we return from the pairs, people will be able to, again, send your questions in the chat to Joyce Herman. So, wonderful tech person who is named Temple Sinai. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay. Lindsay, are you ready to put us? And again,
Yes.
you're putting me with Joyce.
Oh,
Thank
all right.
you.
We're going in groups of 2, is that correct?
2 people in group pairs, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cherie, thank you so much. Just as inspiring and vital and just as I've heard before, but with always with some kind of new nuance and yeah,
Thank you.
appropriate for the challenges of our day. All right, we'll come back for questions after the little break into the breakout rooms.
Just 1 second.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsay.
I'm promising it is 1 second. There's nothing wrong. I'm just making
People
sure
can
that
take a deep breath.
right
Breathing
people.
is good. You're doing great, Lindsay.
And here we go.
Okay.
Be back in 10 minutes.
Nice. Okay. Hi, Frank.
Hi, Joyce.
Look, Frank.
I just met Renee.
Background. Look at my background on my wall. Let's see this. Your marquetry is on my wall and it's showing. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, I'm typing my question.
Okay, great.
Oh, did you want to say, Joyce, you want to wait till everyone's back and say the thing about the question?
Yeah, I want to wait till everyone's back.
Yeah, it looks like not everyone's back yet.
I hope they'll come back. Okay.
Well, there's no choice. You just get summoned back in.
Yeah.
Well, you don't get to stay in your pair, but there is choice.
Everybody's back.
Lois, we actually had 50 seconds to close up.
It's my favorite part about Zoom. I don't ever have to be wandering the halls again, trying to get people back from breaks.
I love a question we had from our co-president saying, would it be possible to get a copy of Cherie's list of coalition building practices? And I'll bet It would be possible, and I'm asking her to.
Joyce, I'll email you my talk.
Great, and then we can have those practices listed on our website. And I'm asking.
That's great.
Great. Joyce, I'll send you a copy of the talk and you can decide how to use it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Joni. Okay.
So it looks like
Ah,
folks
good,
are.
everybody's
Of
back.
course, I'm already writing a question to you.
Joyce,
So-
you wanted to say the thing about the questions?
Yes, I want, please feel free to put your questions into the chat. And if you want your name mentioned with the question, put your name at the end of your question. Otherwise, I'll just read the question without the person's name. And I may not be able to get to all of them anyway.
And again, send them just to Joyce.
Well, that's the only one I think they can, so. okay.
Nope, someone did everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. That was me.
Yeah, so yeah, send them just to Joyce.
Okay. All right, Lindsay, all right, that's good. All right, Sandy Litzner. Well, is that okay? Given the grave threat political polarization is posing to our democracy at this moment of imminent midterm elections, what recommendations do you have about critical or time-sensitive steps to be taken? I know you haven't gotten into the political pieces so much, as much as how to
Yeah.
approach this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the principles are the same, whether you're trying to strengthen a political party. I mean, as moving into the elections, if you are trying to work to get candidates elected, the principles of relationship building, whether you are on a Zoom call, a phone call, knocking on a door. I mean, all of the organizing practices that we use to organize people, all of those listening skills are key in those practices. I mean, organizing, we need millions and millions of people in our movements, whether it's around democracy, around climate change. I mean, we are going to need worldwide movements. Organizing is still a one-on-one practice. You are still reaching person to person to person. If you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people doing that outreach, you are going to have huge impact. Yes, you can also figure out how to do ads, how to do things that rise people up. I still believe deeply that rising people to be able to think. I mean, panicked people are scared people, and scared people don't think. To have democracies, we need thinking people. So I know that there's a poll, because if one side is using very divisive things that terrorize everybody, the poll is to just do the other side of that practice. But remember, when you organize people on painful emotion, you have scared people. And scared people is a mob, and we saw that on January 6th. And so rising people to their better selves through organizing is still the way we are going to defeat the forces of oppression that we want to defeat. There's no shortcut to organizing in terms of doing one-on-one recruitment, one-on-one conversations, and then you get more and more and more people. And you word ads in ways that rise people up to the best of their humanity.
Thank you. I think that answers a couple of the other questions about, is this a time when we're not going to compromise if the positions feel so strongly
Right.
negative. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think learning to listen to the other side is not this. I mean, we get so worried about this issue of compromise. And I mean, a number of recent issues that I was absolutely clear that I thought one way. And I forced myself to have a lot of conversations on this issue, particularly with a whole group of young adults that I strongly disagreed with. And I listened and listened and listened, and I changed how I thought we needed to move forward, having done that listening. I can't emphasize enough that yes, we get to hold on to our principles. It's not that I want to say we suddenly turn out that it's okay to be racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, etc. However, the being able to listen to people whose positions we don't agree with, in that listening, you learn a lot. If nothing else, then what's going to be needed to move people. But I want us to be open to even thinking that the things we think are absolute, we are open to new information. We always need to be open to new information. So it's not that I want us to compromise on the basic principles that, we hold dear. But I do want us to be able to listen in places that are unbearable. I listened a number of months ago to a Palestinian woman I was building a relationship with. And it was right after there were 4 Palestinian prisoners that had escaped from Israeli prisons, and they were still loose. And this woman went on and on about how ecstatic she was that they had escaped. And my stomach clutched. And all I could think was, oh my gosh, this is dangerous. This isn't good. This is awful. And then I was like, Cherie, just listen to her. Just listen to her. And that's the spots I want us to listen past where we can listen. Because if nothing else, you're going to build a bridge and a relationship that you're each going to learn from each other.
Yeah, hard as it may be. Yeah. There's a question here from Susan Trian. When you say Blacks disengage from Jews with panic behavior, what do you mean exactly by panic behavior? Can you please define it?
Yeah, I said some of the things, but I often do a little chart. And in that chart is that the flames of 2,000 years of anti-Semitism underneath us, and particularly white Ashkenazi Jews. And I say that because Jews of color often have different struggles that show a little differently. But certainly it's like we are panicked. And when you're urgent and panicked, sometimes I know I find myself, I have a Black colleague I've worked with for almost 30 years in NCBI. And sometimes we're in the middle of something and I will interrupt her. I'm excited, I'm a little anxious. And when I interrupt her, she loses her thought. As a Black woman, she's been taught so much that she's stupid. My interrupting her, she loses her thought. And then she's mad at me for interrupting her, which is right. She's right. I'm not being malicious when I interrupt her, but I am being a little urgent. And sometimes for us as Jews, our safety often requires us to need to be in charge of things. I often will share a story many, many years ago. My younger brother was getting married, and my dad, when he was in a car, needed to be the one driving the car. He needed to be in charge. My dad, the baby of 13 children, lost many of his family in the Holocaust. When he was in a car, to feel safe, he needed to be driving. Well, my dad had broken his arm that week of the wedding and he couldn't drive the car. So I was driving the car and he was in the back seat and he's screaming, "You're not going far enough to the right." And he's like anxious and panicked. And I just said, "Daddy, I guess I'm not going far enough to the right." And he laughed and laughed and he was able to relax. And I share that story. My dad needed to drive as a way of feeling safe. When you do that behavior, if you're a white Jew and you are working, organizing in partnership with a person of color, and you have to always be the one driving, that's going to be racism. And again, we come by this out of a history of oppression. But that's what scared active behavior means a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah. So a couple of questions here about how it is that you decide and how you act. One is, what is the limit to unbearable? What extent of harm can you listen? And listen without compromising your values. Is there a place for self-defense in the face of genocide?
Okay. Let me say many things. Number one, you get the choice of when you listen and when you don't. You know those days when you feel great and someone can say horrible things and you're like, tell me more. And then those other days when someone can look at you slightly sidewise and you're either ready to smack them or leave or whatever. We get to decide what we take on and when and with whom. I've made a personal decision that I will listen to Palestinians saying the most horrendous things because I want that alliance, and I know that they have had to undergo horrible oppression by Israeli Jews, my people, and I want to move that. And in order to move that, I want to get myself in shape to listen to that. There's other things. I can't listen as easily to a white Gentile saying certain things about Israel. I don't have the same decision to listen to a white Gentile say Israel's terrible as to a Palestinian. Because those are really two different identities and two different groups. So you always get to decide who you want to listen to, who you want to create space for, who you're trying to build a bridge with. And then in NCBI terms, we say, put your ouch in the parking lot temporarily. Putting a car in a parking lot means you can still get your car if you remember where it is. Putting your upset temporarily aside to listen is what we're trying to reach for. Now, sometimes we can do that and sometimes we can't. That's also the role of an ally. If you can't listen, an ally maybe who doesn't have the same triggers as you do can listen. If you're going to change someone, somebody has to listen to them. People do not change if they're not listened to. Whether you in every moment have to be the person, it's your decision. My goal is that more and more we will have bigger and bigger space to listen. A story I often share is many years ago, as Joyce mentioned, I used to do work in NCBI chapter in Northern Ireland, doing work between Catholics and Protestants. And I had just led an NCBI workshop between families who had lost members of their families due to terrorism and violence in Northern Ireland, Catholic and Protestant young people. One had just shared a story that day about what it was like for him the day his father was shot on the steps of his house. It was a very emotional day. And that night we were being given home hospitality by a Protestant minister in the community. And he didn't know that I was Jewish. And my colleague was not a Jew. And we're in the middle of just having home hospitality, and they made cakes for us and we were eating. And I don't remember what the conversation was about. But at one point, the minister said, Jews, they're a terrible people. I don't think they should exist. Yeah, exactly. Karen, my mouth, I froze. And I'm yelling at myself in my head, Cherie Brown, you train people all over the world to do something, say something. That didn't help. I froze and couldn't say a word. My colleague, who's not Jewish, didn't mean he liked that comment, but he didn't have the same trigger about it that I as a Jew did. So he moved in and said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. And they'd gotten a conversation. I just stepped back and listened. And at the end of the evening, it was time to go to bed. And I turned to my colleague and said, could I get a few minutes with you? I'm going to need to vent or I'm going to have nightmares. And I put a pillow over my mouth so nobody would hear me. I said, that stupid idiot, he doesn't deserve to exist. And I got to scream out all of my upset that he never had to hear, but I got to release it. And the next morning at breakfast, I was able to say at breakfast, oh, we were talking about religion last night, but nobody said what religion they were. And I said I was a Jew. And he was fascinated. And we had a lovely conversation. I couldn't do that the night before. So we teach in NCBI, I always call them venting buddies. Hopefully you all have venting buddies in your life, people at home or people at work that you get to go and say, do you know what that idiot said to me? And you get to release all of the upset of what it was like to hear that, and then use some of these principles to practice it. But unless you are able in that moment to put your upset about the comment temporarily aside, you won't be helpful in shifting. I often like to use the image in NCBI of a cup. If a cup is completely full, you can't put more liquid in it. You have to drain the cup. So what we're doing when we listen to people is draining the cup. And when a cup is more empty, there's room for new information, for dialogue, but not when that cup is full.
Wow, great. Great. I think we're coming to near the end of our time. I'll just mention a couple of the things that people have put into the chat.
Okay.
One is that Sandra Katz has said that people can go to the NCBI website for written material, books, and the great pamphlet on Black-Jewish relations on our hooks, which are that's on the NCBI national.
All of it on the website. There's also on the website, we have a new project, Anti-Semitism on College Campuses, where we are teaching Jewish students, faculty, and staff a bridge building approach to doing coalition building, to use these principles to reach out to Palestinian groups and Black Lives Matter. And we've now finished our second cohort of that project. The report from cohort 1 is up on our website, and the report from cohort 2 is almost another month or so will also be up. And so that gives wonderful examples. We use the controversial issue on the issue of, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism, and listening to each other. And so there's a lot of wonderful material on our website.
Great, thank you. Quick question, are you familiar with Braver Angels?
I don't think so.
Okay. They're trying to do some of the similar things, but not in the same way, not with get at the opportunity to vent and to have these kinds of principles. And one quick one, how do you maintain resolve in the face of unsuccessful interactions? And that was Jim.
You cry a lot afterwards. I kid you not. I often like to share a story. I have helped to build many of the groups over, I hate to say how long, but almost 50 years, to do Israel-Palestine reconciliation work. I began doing that work in 1967 after the beginning of the Six-Day War. And in one of the very first groups I ever led had a group of Jews from around the US. There was no organization built yet. Came to my house to have a weekend to talk about doing bridging work between Israeli Jews and Palestinians. And what I never forgot was Saturday night of the event, person after person was sharing stories of failure. And I could watch the room just sink and sink and sink. They, one after the other, told stories that they were feeling totally unsuccessful, no hope. And I remember thinking after that night, I have set Israel-Palestinian work back years. And I went home feeling terrible about the weekend. One by one, people started writing me saying, thank you so much for that Saturday night where I got to say how hopeless I felt. I got to hear that other people were also feeling discouraged. I'm not the only one. That gave me the strength to keep going. And I learned so much in that moment that we have to provide spaces for people to work and heal from their discouragements, disappointments. I mean, again, you know, Joyce is even a little older than I am, but I've been at this. I had my Jewish synagogue do work with a Black church when I was 10, and I'm now 72. So I've been at this a little while. And we are going to have to stay resilient. And the way to me we stay resilient is, one, we have community. We build community with people that are partnered with us and working with us. We build those relationships that will stay for life no matter what. And we heal. We get to talk about the discouragements and the moments that are so painful. And we get to cry and we get to heal and get stronger.
Cherie, you have given us so much to chew on, so much to think about. I think that what you said will be reverberating not only in our own minds and hearts as we confront issues, but hopefully within our congregation and within our community, we will continue these conversations and supporting one another to put some of these principles into practice. So thank you.
Thank you.
So much. So let's, Lindsay, can you unmute everybody so we can say goodbye, Chag Sameach, happy Passover, happy post-Easter,
A meaningful Ramadan.
a meaningful Ramadan, which is, yes.
It's till May 1st.
And don't forget to come back on June 1st.
Yes, on June 1st, it'll be the next in the series, Robert Lieberman, 4 Threats to Democracy. And if you want to be in a book group to read that before, send Joan Rubin a message real quick right now.
Or you can Google me and email me.
There you go. All right. All right. Thank you, every single one of you, for coming. Thank you for going into the breakout rooms. Thank you for asking the questions. And thank you for your passion and your commitment and your concern about our democracy. It's going to take every one of us.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Cherie.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
organizers.
Cherie.
Good night.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.